What happens
Sarah?
when the man you married
I
has
almost
no
didn't
idea who
recognize
your
you.
father really is? What happens
Marcus?
when the entire world
What are you
finds
doing
out at the
here?
altar that your father
You make
isn't
me the
just any man,
happiest man
but the
alive.
most powerful
Will
person
you
in the
marry
country?
me?
Today,
Oh
I'm
my
telling you
god,
a
yes.
story that will shake
Yes,
everything
I
you think
will.
you know about
How could
love,
you do this to
class,
me?
and the price of
On our
secrets.
wedding day.
My name is
I
Kay,
never meant for
and
it
I'm
to
so
happen
glad
like
you're
this,
here
I
because this
swear.
story is absolutely wild. Before we dive in, if you've been enjoying these billionaire stories, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because we upload videos just like this one every single week. And trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming. Now, let me ask you something real quick. Do you think love can survive when it's built on a lie? Do you think a relationship can withstand the shock of discovering that everything you thought you knew about your partner was wrong? Answer that in the comments below because I'm genuinely curious what you guys think. And your comment might just be featured in our next video. Okay, so let's get into this story because it is absolutely insane. And yes, this is based on real events that shocked the entire nation. Ready? Let's go. Chapter 1: The Girl Nobody Noticed. She was invisible, that was the point. Emily walked through the world like a ghost, and that was exactly how she wanted it. Worn jeans, faded sweaters that had seen better decades, hair pulled back in the same tired bun she'd worn for months. Her shoes had holes in them, actual holes you could see your socks through, but she couldn't afford new ones. Not when her father's medical bills were consuming every penny she made. She worked at a coffee shop downtown, the kind of place where tourists came to feel like they were slumming it, pretending to be bohemian while sipping $12 lattes. Emily made those lattes, cleaned those tables, and listened to people complain about problems that meant nothing in the grand scheme of actual suffering. She'd gotten good at being invisible. People looked through her, not at her. The customers who came in every morning never asked her name. She was just the girl who made the coffee. The girl with the tired eyes and the gentle hands. The girl who always had a kind word, even when she was working a double shift and hadn't slept properly in days. Being invisible meant safety. It meant nobody asked questions. It meant nobody would ever wonder why she was working two jobs and still living in a shelter. It meant nobody would ever know that her father was sick, and she was trying to keep his medical information private, trying to keep his dignity intact. But there was a cost to invisibility. The cost was loneliness. The cost was never being seen for who you really were. The cost was coming home every single day to an empty apartment, knowing that nobody in the world would notice if you disappeared. Emily had made peace with that cost. She decided that survival was more important than being known, and she was surviving, just barely, but she was surviving, until the day he walked in. His name was Marcus, Marcus Whitmore. And he was the kind of beautiful that made you believe in God, that made you believe the universe had some kind of design, because nothing that perfect could happen by accident. He was tall, impossibly tall, with shoulders that seemed to block out the light when he walked through the door. His suit was the color of midnight, tailored in a way that screamed money, old money, the kind of money that had been in families for generations. His hair was dark, perfectly styled, but with that touch of rebellion that made it clear he didn't try too hard. And his eyes were this strange shade of gray that seemed to look right through you and see everything. He came in on a Tuesday morning when the coffee shop was empty, except for Emily and one other customer reading a newspaper in the corner. Marcus ordered a simple black coffee, nothing fancy, nothing that would require Emily to do anything complex. He ordered it the way someone orders something they don't care about, like he was going through the motions of being human and didn't really understand why. But then he looked at her, really looked at her. Emily felt his gaze land on her like a physical weight, and she froze for a moment. Nobody really looked at her. People looked through her, past her, around her, but they didn't actually look at her. This man was looking at her. "You okay?" he asked, and his voice was deep, smooth, the kind of voice that probably commanded boardrooms and bent people to his will. "I'm fine," Emily replied automatically, quickly looking away, back down at the coffee she was making. "Just making your coffee." "You looked sad for a second," he said, "like you were somewhere else entirely." Emily didn't know how to respond to that. Nobody had ever noticed her being sad. Nobody had ever acknowledged her internal state at all. She was a service, a function, a means to an end. She wasn't a person with feelings and thoughts and an internal life that sometimes hurt so badly she could barely breathe. I'm okay, she said again, and she handed him the coffee, careful not to make eye contact. That'll be $3.50. He paid cash, left a $5 bill as a tip, which was more than he needed to give, and walked out. Emily thought that was the end of it. She assumed he was a tourist or a businessman passing through, someone who would never come back, but she was wrong, dead wrong. He came back the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that. Within a week, Marcus Whitmore was a regular, the kind of regular who came in at 7 in the morning, ordered a black coffee, and spent 20 minutes sitting in the corner, just watching the world go by. Or at least that's what Emily thought at first. It took her a while to realize he wasn't watching the world. He was watching her. It made her nervous, this sudden attention. She wasn't used to being noticed. She wasn't used to anyone caring enough to notice her existence, let alone care about it. But Marcus had a way of making his interest feel safe. He never made her uncomfortable. He never made demands or asked invasive questions. He just noticed her, he saw her. And slowly, without really planning for it to happen, Emily started to see him too. She started noticing the way he took his coffee, how he never added sugar or cream, how he seemed to prefer things simple and uncomplicated. She noticed the way he dressed differently each day, but always with this air of controlled luxury that made it clear he was from a world she would never be part of. She noticed the way his gray eyes would sometimes look sad, like he was carrying a weight that was too heavy for anyone to bear alone. And she wondered about him. She wondered who he was and where he came from, and why he spent so much time in a cheap coffee shop drinking black coffee and watching a girl in worn jeans make lattes for tourists. It took 3 weeks before he finally asked her name. Emily, she said, surprised that he'd waited this long. Emily Hart. Marcus Whitmore, he replied, extending his hand across the counter. She shook it, and it was like touching electricity. His hand was warm and strong, and his grip was firm but gentle, and when he smiled, it was like the sun broke through clouds that Emily hadn't even realized were there. He had a dimple on his left side, just one, and it made him look impossibly young and impossibly vulnerable all at the same time. Emily Hart, he repeated, like he was trying the name out, seeing if it fit. That's a beautiful name. It's just a name, Emily said, pulling her hand back, trying to act casual even though her heart was racing in a way that felt dangerous. Just Emily Hart. No, Marcus said, and there was something intense in his voice that made her look at him. There's nothing just about you, Emily. And that's when everything changed. Chapter 2, The Attention of a Billionaire. Marcus Whitmore wasn't just wealthy. He wasn't just a rich man who liked to buy expensive things and wear expensive clothes. Marcus Whitmore was a billionaire. Not a millionaire, not someone who had accumulated substantial wealth, but an actual billionaire with assets that were difficult to comprehend when you were living paycheck to paycheck. Emily didn't know this at first. She found out gradually, through small clues that didn't make sense until they all clicked together into one devastating realization. First, she noticed the car. He arrived one morning in a vehicle so sleek and expensive that it looked like it had been designed by aliens trying to imagine what luxury should look like. The paint was metallic silver, the kind of color that seemed to shift and change depending on the angle of the light. When she mentioned it, Marcus explained casually that it was a prototype, a one-of-a-kind model that had been custom-built to his specifications. It cost more than the building she lived in, probably more than her entire life's earnings combined. Then there was the phone call. Emily was working the register when Marcus took a call, and he stood in the corner of the coffee shop, speaking so quietly she almost couldn't hear him. But the words that reached her ears were shocking. Yes, I've reviewed the contract, he said. The terms are acceptable. Draw up the final papers and we'll close the acquisition by Friday. That puts us at 42% market share in the North American division, which is right where we want to be. He was talking about acquiring entire companies, the way most people talked about buying groceries. And then there was the moment his assistant showed up. This man walked in wearing a suit that probably cost more than Emily's annual salary, and he came directly to Marcus with a leather portfolio filled with documents. Marcus introduced her to him as Garrett, his personal assistant. Garrett looked at Emily with barely concealed surprise, like he couldn't understand why his boss was spending so much time in a coffee shop talking to a barista. But the moment that made Emily truly understand the scope of Marcus's wealth came on a Friday evening when he asked her if she'd like to get dinner with him. She shouldn't have said yes. She should have recognized that a man like him, a man from a world she couldn't even imagine, could never be interested in someone like her for any real reason. She should have protected herself. But she was tired of protecting herself. She was tired of being invisible. And Marcus looked at her like she was the most important person in the world. The restaurant was insane. It was the kind of place where you needed reservations months in advance, where celebrities ate, where the food was more about art than sustenance. The host recognized Marcus immediately, ushered them to a table that overlooked the entire city, the kind of table that people waited years for. Emily sat across from him in the dress she'd borrowed from her coworker Jade, a dress that didn't quite fit but was the nicest thing she owned, and tried not to panic. "What's wrong?" Marcus asked, studying her face with those penetrating gray eyes. "You look like you're about to run away." "I don't belong here," Emily said honestly. "Look around, look at me and look at everyone else. I don't belong here." Marcus reached across the table and took her hand. "The only person who doesn't belong here is everyone except you and me. Everyone else is just pretending to be themselves. You're the first person I've met in years who's actually real." And he meant it. Emily could see it in his face, could feel it in the way he held her hand. He wasn't interested in her because she was beautiful, though she realized gradually that maybe she was, under the right light, in the right clothes, when someone was looking at her the way Marcus did. He was interested in her because she was honest. Because she didn't play games. Because she'd spent so long being invisible that she'd learned to see the world clearly, and that clarity was reflected in everything she said and did. They started dating after that night. It was slow at first, just him coming into the coffee shop every morning and asking her about her life, her dreams, her fears. He asked her why she was working so hard, why she looked so tired all the time. And gradually, Emily told him the truth. She told him about her father. Her father had been a good man. A kind man. He'd raised her alone after her mother died when Emily was 5 years old, and he'd done the best he could with what he had. He worked as a teacher, made a modest salary, loved his students and his daughter with a fierceness that was almost painful. But 5 years ago he'd gotten sick. Cancer. The kind that comes on suddenly and progresses fast. The kind that destroys your savings and your health at the same time. Emily had taken time off school to care for him, eventually dropping out entirely. She'd moved them into a small apartment, taken the 2 jobs, and started the impossible task of trying to keep him alive while also keeping a roof over their heads. The medical bills were astronomical. Every day was a choice between buying his medication and buying groceries, between paying the rent and paying the hospital. Her father kept apologizing, kept telling her to let him go, to stop wasting money trying to keep him alive. But Emily couldn't do that. He was her father. He was everything. When she told Marcus all this, he was quiet for a long time. He didn't offer platitudes or empty sympathy. He didn't make it about himself or try to fix everything with money, though she could see in his expression that he wanted to. "How much?" he asked finally. "What? How much would it take to give your father the best care? To give you breathing room? To let you live your life instead of constantly drowning?" Emily felt tears threatening and blinked them back. "I don't know, a lot, more than I could ever have." "Let me help you," Marcus said. "No." Emily pulled her hand away. "I can't, I won't." "Why not?" "Because I'm not a charity case. Because I don't want to be with you because you feel sorry for me. Because I want to earn my own way in the world." Marcus looked at her for a long moment, and she could see him wrestling with something, some internal conflict playing out behind those gray eyes. "You're not a charity case," he said finally. "And I don't feel sorry for you, I feel like you're the strongest person I've ever met, and I want to stand beside that strength, not diminish it with money. So let me do it differently." "Do what differently?" "Marry me." Emily laughed. Actually laughed because the alternative was to cry, and she needed to laugh because nothing about this made sense. They'd been dating for 2 months. They barely knew each other. He was a billionaire and she was a barista. This was insane. But Marcus wasn't laughing. His face was completely serious, completely sincere. "I'm not joking," he said. "I love you, Emily Hart. I've never believed in love before." I thought it was something people invented to justify attachment and possession. But this is real. I know you, I see you, and I want to spend my life seeing you and knowing you and being known by you. You can't marry me because you feel sorry for me, Emily whispered. I'm not. I'm asking you to marry me because you make me want to be better. Because when you smile at me, the whole world seems to make sense in a way it never has before. Because I've been alone my entire life, surrounded by people who wanted pieces of me, and you're the first person who's ever wanted just me. He was right. Emily knew he was right. She said yes. Chapter 3. The Secret. But there was something Emily didn't know about Marcus. There was something he hadn't told her, something he'd deliberately hidden from her because he wanted to be loved for who he was, not for what he had. Marcus Whitmore's parents were dead. That was true. His father had passed away when Marcus was 12, and his mother had died when he was in his early 20s. But what Emily didn't know was who they were. His mother had been a businesswoman, but more than that, she'd been the daughter of a senator. And his father, before he died, had been a prominent figure in international finance. The Whitmore family was old money mixed with new power, the kind of family that had shaped policy and influenced nations for generations. But Marcus had built his own empire. After his parents died, he'd taken the inheritance and the family connections, and he'd transformed them into something entirely different. He'd built his company from the ground up, made decisions that were his own, become a billionaire through his own work and his own merit. And when he fell in love with Emily, he wanted her to love the man he'd made himself into, not the man he'd been born as. So he didn't tell her. He let her believe he was just a wealthy businessman. He let her think that the money came from his own effort and skill. He let her fall in love with Marcus the man, not Marcus the Whitmore heir. They got engaged 3 months after he proposed. Emily wanted a small wedding, something intimate and simple. But Marcus's people, the lawyers and the assistants and the whole machinery of his life, they wanted something bigger. They wanted a society wedding, the kind of event that would be covered by every major news outlet. They wanted to announce to the world that Marcus Whitmore was getting married. Emily found herself caught in a whirlwind of wedding planning. There were dress fittings with designers she'd never heard of, guest lists that seemed to grow exponentially, decisions about venues and flowers, and catering for hundreds of people she'd never met. It was overwhelming and exciting and terrifying all at once. She'd gone from being invisible to being the center of attention, and she wasn't sure how to process that transformation. The dress was stunning. It was custom-made by a designer who dressed royalty, a creation of ivory silk and delicate lace that made Emily look like she'd stepped out of a fairy tale. When she looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman looking back at her. She looked beautiful. She looked like she belonged in this world of wealth and power. She looked like someone who was about to marry a billionaire. But underneath the dress and the makeup and the carefully styled hair, she was still the same Emily. She was still the girl who'd worked 2 jobs to keep her father alive. She was still the girl who'd been invisible for so long that she'd started to believe she didn't really exist. 2 days before the wedding, her father had a stroke. It was a small one, the doctors said, not as bad as it could have been. But it was a reminder that his health was fragile, that time was running out, that every moment was precious. Emily wanted to postpone the wedding. She went to Marcus and told him that they needed to wait, that her father was sick, that she needed to be with him. "We'll reschedule," she said. "It doesn't matter. What matters is my father." But Marcus had already moved heaven and earth for this wedding. Thousands of people had already made arrangements to attend. The venue was booked, the catering was in place, the media was already camped outside the hotel where they were staying. Postponing the wedding would be a massive undertaking, and it would raise questions that Marcus didn't want to answer. "Come to the hospital after the wedding," he suggested. "We'll do a quick ceremony, get through the reception, and then you can go be with your father." Emily should have walked away. She should have told Marcus that if he couldn't understand that her father was more important than any wedding, then they weren't right for each other. But she was tired. She was emotionally drained from months of worry. And Marcus was looking at her with those gray eyes that made her believe that everything would be okay, that he would take care of her, that she didn't have to carry this weight alone anymore. "Okay," she said. "Okay, we'll do it your way." But even as she said it, she felt something shift inside her. A doubt. a concern that she'd been so focused on Marcus's love that she hadn't asked the important questions. What did she really know about him? What had he kept from her? Chapter 4, The Morning of the Wedding. The wedding day arrived with the kind of perfect weather that seemed designed for fairy tales. The sky was clear and blue, the sun was bright, and the air was warm but not hot. Emily stood in the bridal suite of the Grand Whitmore Hotel, a venue that she now understood was named after Marcus's family, a detail he'd never bothered to mention. She looked at herself in the mirror and felt like she was living someone else's life. Her friend Jade was with her, helping with the final touches on her hair and makeup. Jade had been working the morning shift at the coffee shop when Emily had met Marcus, and she'd watched the entire whirlwind romance unfold with a mixture of happiness and concern. "You look incredible," Jade said, adjusting the delicate veil that fell from Emily's hair. "Like a princess. Are you sure you're okay? You seem kind of quiet." Emily forced a smile. "I'm fine, just nervous. It's a big day." "It's a huge day," Jade agreed. "You're marrying a billionaire. Your life is about to completely change." Emily nodded, not trusting her voice to say anything more. Because the truth was, her life had already changed. It had changed the moment Marcus walked into that coffee shop. Everything had shifted, and she was still trying to catch up with the speed of it all. There was a knock on the door, and Marcus's assistant Garrett appeared, looking immaculate in his tailored suit. "It's time," he said. "The guests are all seated. We're ready to begin." Emily took a deep breath and stood up. The dress moved around her like clouds, and she felt almost weightless, like she was floating toward her fate rather than walking toward it. Jade squeezed her hand. "You've got this," her friend whispered. "Go get married to your billionaire prince." Emily walked down the hallway toward the ceremony chamber, and she could hear the music starting, the soft strains of a string quartet playing the wedding march. The doors opened, and she saw the assembled crowd. There were hundreds of people, all dressed in their finest, all turning to look at her as she walked down the aisle. She recognized some of them from the news. There were politicians, celebrities, business magnates. There were people whose names she'd heard mentioned on the television, people who wielded real power in the world, and they were all here for her wedding. Marcus stood at the altar looking absolutely perfect in his tailored suit, his gray eyes locked on her as she walked toward him. He smiled that smile with the single dimple, and Emily felt her doubts start to fade. This was real. She loved him. Whatever secrets they were both keeping, that much was true. She reached the altar and took his hands. They were warm and steady, and she held on to them like they were the only solid thing in a world that had become entirely surreal. The ceremony was beautiful. The officiant was a judge that Marcus knew, and he spoke about love and commitment, and the courage it took to build a life with another person. Emily barely heard the words. She was too focused on Marcus's face, on the intensity of his gaze, on the way he said his vows with a voice that was steady and sure and completely sincere. "I promise to love you," he said, "for exactly who you are. I promise to see you the way you deserve to be seen. I promise to be your partner in everything, through every challenge, in every joy. I promise to stand beside you until my last breath." And Emily believed him. She believed every word. When it was her turn, her voice shook slightly as she spoke her own vows. "I promise to love you and to honor the love you give me. I promise to build a life with you, to support you, to challenge you to be better. I promise to be honest with you always, because honesty is the only real foundation for love." And then the judge said the magic words, and Marcus kissed her, and the crowd erupted in applause. But as they walked down the aisle together, as confetti fell around them and cameras flashed, Emily noticed something. In the crowd, she saw a man she didn't recognize. He was older, distinguished, with silver hair and a commanding presence. He was standing in the second row, and he was staring at Emily with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. When their eyes met, he didn't look away. He held her gaze, and in that moment, Emily felt a chill run down her spine. She asked Marcus about it as they were being swept into photographs. "The older man, silver hair, second row," she said quietly. "Who is that?" Marcus's entire body went rigid. He didn't even have to look to know who she was talking about. "Someone I haven't seen in a long time," he said carefully. "Why is he here? Why is he looking at me like that?" "Emily, not now. Let's just get through the reception." But that simple response, the way he'd avoided answering her directly, It confirmed what she'd been starting to suspect. Marcus was hiding something, something big, something that he'd felt was important enough to keep secret from her. Chapter 5: The Reception and the Revelation. The reception was held in the grand ballroom of the hotel, a space so enormous that it could have fit 3 football fields. There were ice sculptures and crystal chandeliers, tables set with flowers that must have cost thousands of dollars. There was champagne from France and caviar from Russia, and a 5-course meal prepared by a Michelin-starred chef. Everything was opulent and expensive, and completely disconnected from the world Emily had lived in just months before. They danced to their first song, and Emily tried to push her concerns aside. Marcus held her close, and she rested her head against his chest, and for a moment everything felt right again. But only for a moment. As the night progressed, Emily noticed more and more unusual things. Garrett was having intense conversations with security personnel, speaking into an invisible earpiece. There seemed to be more security than was typical for a wedding, uniformed officers stationed at various points throughout the ballroom. And every few minutes, someone would approach Marcus and speak to him quietly, and his expression would become more and more tense. Emily excused herself to use the restroom, and as she walked down the hallway, she overheard a conversation between 2 security officers. "The president is here," one of them was saying into his earpiece. "Third row, near the back. No one should approach him directly. Let me know if there's any deviation from the plan." Emily froze. The president of the United States, was at her wedding, and nobody had thought to mention that to her. She made her way back to the ballroom, her heart pounding. She found Marcus in conversation with Garrett and pulled him aside. "The president is here," she said quietly, her voice slightly hysterical. "The president of the United States is at my wedding." Marcus's face went pale. "Who told you that?" "I overheard security officers talking." "Marcus, what is going on? Why is the president here? Why didn't you tell me?" "Emily, I need to explain something to you, and I need you to stay calm." "Stay calm? I'm married to a man I don't actually know. I just overheard security officers talking about the president like he's a personal acquaintance. How am I supposed to stay calm?" Marcus took her arm and led her away from the main ballroom, into a private room adjacent to the reception. Once they were alone, he closed the door and took a deep breath. "My parents," he said, "they were very prominent people. My father was in finance and politics. My mother was connected to the highest levels of government. I grew up in a world of power and influence that I've spent my entire adult life trying to escape. I wanted to build something on my own, to prove that I could be successful without relying on family connections or inherited wealth." "Okay," Emily said slowly, trying to understand where this was going. "So you're telling me your parents were important people. That doesn't explain the president." "The president was a friend of my father's," Marcus said. "A close friend, and when I decided to marry you there was discussion about whether he should attend. And you didn't think I should know that." "I didn't want it to matter," Marcus said, and she could hear the frustration in his voice. "I didn't want you to feel like you needed to be different or perform or worry about being judged by someone in that position. I wanted the wedding to be about us." Emily wanted to believe him. She wanted to understand his reasoning. But something still didn't add up. "There's something else," she said. "Something you're not telling me. What is it?" Marcus looked at her for a long moment, and she could see him wrestling with a decision. "Your father," he said finally. "What about my father?" "When I said I wanted to help you with his medical bills, when I offered to take care of everything, I was offering because I knew I could give him the best care. The absolute best. And there was a reason for that." "What reason?" Marcus took both of her hands. "I need you to trust me, Emily. I need you to trust that everything I've done because I love you and I wanted to protect you and your father." "Marcus, you're scaring me. Just tell me what's going on." He took a breath. "The security officer you overheard, when he said the president, he was referring to your father." Emily felt the world tilt around her. "What? Your father is the president?" "Or he was before his stroke. He stepped back from public life about 5 years ago, around the time he got sick. He wanted to spend time with you, to focus on his health. But he's still connected to the government, still involved in policy decisions. He's still one of the most powerful men in the country." Emily felt like she was going to faint. She sat down hard on a chair, her wedding dress spreading around her like a cloud of white silk. "My father," she whispered. "My father is the president." Was the president. He served 2 full terms before stepping back. He's still highly respected, still involved in government. Why didn't he tell me? Because he wanted you to grow up normal, Marcus said. He wanted you to have a life that wasn't defined by his position. He wanted you to be Emily Hart, not Emily Hart, daughter of the president. He wanted to protect you from all of this. Emily's mind was spinning. She thought about her childhood, about the times her father had seemed distracted, about the times she'd wondered why he disappeared for days at a time, why Secret Service agents were sometimes following them. She'd assumed they were just visiting relatives. She'd assumed her father was away on business. She'd had no idea. "How long have you known?" she asked. "About 3 months before I proposed." "And you didn't tell me." "I wanted to marry you without that information. I wanted to know that you loved me for me, not for the connections, not for the access to power. I wanted to know that you weren't interested in me because of what I could give you or who I could introduce you to." Emily felt tears streaming down her face. She stood up and walked away from him, pressing her hands against her temples. "I can't process this right now. I need to see my father." "He's here," Marcus said quietly. "He came to see you get married." Emily looked at him with tears blurring her vision. "How could you not tell me? How could you let me walk down that aisle not knowing that my father was in the room? How could you not tell me that he was the president?" "Because I was scared," Marcus said, and for the first time since she'd known him, he sounded vulnerable. He sounded like a man who was losing something precious and didn't know how to stop it. "I was scared that if you knew, everything would change. I was scared that you would feel like I'd been manipulating you, like I'd somehow orchestrated this whole thing to get close to your father, or to use your family connections. And I was scared that you would leave me." "Maybe I should," Emily said quietly. "Maybe we made a mistake. Maybe this was all a mistake." "Emily, please don't say that." But she was already moving toward the door. She needed to find her father. She needed to see him, to talk to him, to understand how they'd both conspired to keep this secret from her on the most important day of her life. Chapter 6. The Truth at the Altar. Emily walked back into the reception ballroom, and now that she knew what to look for, she could see it immediately. The man with the silver hair, the one who'd been staring at her, he was her father. Of course it was her father. The resemblance was there in the line of his jaw, in the shape of his eyes. How had she not seen it? How had she allowed Marcus to keep her so off balance that she couldn't see what was right in front of her? She moved through the crowd, pushing past people who tried to congratulate her, until she reached the table where he was sitting. He was with 2 security officers, and he was watching her approach with an expression of deep concern. "Dad," she said, and her voice was shaking. He stood up immediately, his face transforming. She realized, suddenly, that he'd been waiting for her to recognize him, waiting for this moment, probably dreading it the same way he dreaded most things these days. "Emily," he said, and his voice was still strong, still authoritative, despite the physical frailty she could see in his form. "I need to talk to you." "Why didn't you tell me?" The question came out almost as an accusation. "Why didn't you tell me that you were the president? That you were here? That you'd been lying to me my entire life?" "Let's go somewhere private," her father said, and he gestured to one of the security officers, who quickly cleared a path for them to exit the ballroom. They were escorted to a private room, similar to the one where Marcus had confessed his secrets. Once the door was closed, Emily's father sat down slowly, like the action caused him pain. "I kept it from you because I wanted you to have a normal life," he said. "I know that Marcus probably explained that to you. When I was president, there was so much danger, so much scrutiny.